Yeah, you're right. Yeah, it's a.
Oh, okay.
No, you're right. I just didn't ever see it, so I was like, wow, we haven't.
Maybe it's not. I thought it was.
No, what I think you have the agenda.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, right here's the agenda, and then it'll just tell you off there what you're going to talk about and everything.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, nice meeting
Nice
you.
meeting you too.
Wonderful. Okay, sounds good.
All right, I do a call order, let everybody take their hats off, remove your cell phones, stand for the pledge of allegiance, please. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Do you think we're pledging to use the rock? Yeah.
Yes, I feel very honored. Thank you.
The budget man. Okay. Okay, call to order, can you roll call, please?
Here.
Here. Okay. Special meeting was called by myself, Jason Cruz, to address the following business items. I was going to give an audit report to Mr. Ryan Howell. He works with UHY, and he was our auditor through this last audit. And then what we'll do after the audit report, we'll jump over to Mr. Rod Taylor. He's a senior government consultant. He works with Mandarin Costa. I always get messed up. Sorry, Rod. We'll get over to him. We're going to take a look at the budget and things to be done with our newly presented budget outline. And the consent agenda is as follows. And for the new general budget format is what I'd like to approve on the consent agenda rather, and new sewer budget format and amendments to the general and sewer budgets. So basically, by going through the consent agenda, after we review this newly presented budget, the amendments are embedded in the budget already to reflect the way that the township needs to go at this point in time. And by doing the consent agenda, we consent to all of it. Now, you'll notice that in front of you, you have the general budget. We're going to get to that in a little bit shortly. But we don't have the sewer budget. Because the sewer budget, nothing's really going to change. I just want the board to consent change the format over to the sewer budget, same what we're seeing here. Make it much easier to read and easier to follow. So, without further ado, I wish to call up Mr. Howell, if you would, and present your report, please.
Hi, I'm Howell, and here's why. Just that the front here. Sorry. Okay. So I'll kind of briefly go over the audit report, high level, touch on some highlights and some reasons, so if you want to look remember from the bottom, you guys had a decrease in fund balance of 168,108 this past year, which brings your fund balance down to 423,102. A couple of things to highlight compared to the previous year, and what actually happened this past year during the audit, is you guys had a large foot road project. You guys paid for Fifth Avenue, which cost $122,686. The prior year, we were kind of comparing year to year, it was like $69,000 in roads. So that was definitely an increase compared to normal years. I feel like in some years you just keep lining, and you don't have that road project. So that's one thing that definitely assisted in the decrease in the fund balance this past year. And then the other one would be turning professional fees, and obviously that was for this past year. So I think the combination of those two items made up the majority of that shortfall this past year. So that's really the highlights of the general fund. Other than those two, everything else is pretty consistent with every prior years. There's a couple things I'll highlight on the balance sheet. So if you guys should flip to page 13, which is before that. There's a couple things that are unique. One thing was some unearned revenue. There was $100,000 of unearned revenue. This is related to the reimbursement of PCT costs from the development agreement with Ocean. Based on conversations with township officials, none of this was actually spent as of yet. It was money received, cash received, but nothing has been earmarked to be spent offset those funds. So that's why it's sitting there. So that's money you guys have in your bank account. Once you guys have the expenses that qualify for that, those will be recognized as revenue as the other expenses to be offset.
Yes, that is correct. So unearned revenue means that it's revenue that comes into the township but is not registered, right? So it's not your money spent. So it's not registered until each other budget. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah, no, it would not be in your budget because it hasn't been recognized as revenue.
And then just to back up one more time, just before we get down the road too far, I'm just trying to turn this on, just to make sure everybody's hearing me back. So basically the decrease at $168,000 was the paving of the 205th Avenue, which was about $100,000, somewhere around 123,000. And then obviously attorney fees because of the situations that we're in. One, drafting the development agreement, and then obviously the lawsuit with Ocean, and then the changeover with the board, and all the accrued costs for that. Okay. So that would just affect, that affects the bottom line then? I'm just going to play devil's advocate.
The 100,000?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it hasn't been moved to revenue yet. So you actually have an expense that you say qualifies as offsetting it. It's in, you have $5,000 in return fees. You say, hey, this qualifies against it. We move $5,000 from revenue over to revenue on the income statement. And then if we pick up the income tax.
Okay, thank you.
And then on that same balance sheet, another item I would like to point out is under the fund balance section. So you said fund balance is at $423,102. It's broken down into three categories. One is non-spendable or prepaid expenses. That basically means you guys have some prepaid expenses. Typically, that's like insurance, stuff like that, where the period of coverage doesn't match up with the fiscal year. So you guys are paying for something that has a future benefit in the following year. So that is a portion of your spend that money. We just haven't expensed it yet, basically. So that's why it sits there. The next category is assigned for subsequent years budget shortfall. So you get original adopted budget showed a shortfall this next year with the 24-25 budget of $180,190. So that we're saying, hey, of this fund balance of 423, we're going to potentially feed into it 180,000. Now, there may be some amendments as the year goes on to tighten that up. If there was, one thing I just glanced at is they get budgeted another $100,000 for a road project. then the other fund that we have is the sewer fund. If you go to page 17, if you're already kind of looking at the balance sheet at the general fund level, the statement of deposition is the same thing, but at a full level for the sewer fund. So a couple of things on this one is you have unearned revenue in this fund as well, $175,023. So this is your remaining ARPA funds that we have not spent yet. So originally, basically that's about half. The first half was earmarked for towers that were put up. And so this is the remaining fund. So again, the money was moved, it was sitting in the general fund as under, it got moved over to the sewer fund because originally it was going to be utilized for a lift station there. And I don't know what it's going to be utilized for now, but it doesn't sound like that's going to be the case. So that money is sitting in the cash account on the balance sheet and not being recognized as revenue either. It could very easily be moved back over to the general fund and be obligated for some expenses for the 24 to 25 years. The general fund for the sewer fund revenue for itself. So, but that's another big liability on the books that will show up as revenue once you identify it and have an offset expense. Because it is sitting up in cash. So that's kind of, and then down at the bottom of that page, the net position is $886,997 for the sewer fund. Now this one's a little different than the general fund. Your capital assets actually get reported on this balance sheet, more like a business surplus compared to the general fund. It's like a modified business surplus. So it's a little unique. So the first number, $452,706, that is just the capital asset portion of that position. Really, that unrestricted portion is the more important. That's like the money you have to spend, money, receivables, less payables, basically, that you have to utilize to spend in this year. If we look at page 18, so this is the statement of revenues, expenses, and changes in that position. So again, kind of like the income statement. Third number from the bottom, we had a loss or a decrease of $1,112, so very close to the break even. The net position, and then like we just said, $886,097, built up of those two different components. The one thing I do like to point out, the primary funds are unique because they also have depreciation of non-cash items in there as well. So if you look at page 19, you're required to do a cash flow statement for sewer funds. And the first section, the top half there, where it totals at $670,314, which is the cash flow for the year, you did have an increase of cash from operating activities of like $66,300. That's just looking at the cash coming in and being paid out. And the cash did increase $73,860 this past year. So even though from an income statement standpoint, you're at about break-even, you are adding to your cash balance each year. And a lot of that has to do with some non-cash things like depreciation and stuff like that.
Yeah, Scott, so on increase, is that, do you think it's a fair increase from the sewer budget, or do you think it needs to be larger, or are the increasing well, do you think? How is that?
Yeah, I mean, your cash is up. There's some things that also play a part, like YouTube become like the general and the general fund, like if they pay something or receive something, in the money, and they're changing it yet, which I think was a little bit of the case funds, okay, I mean, obviously, with the original budget being adopted, showing $180,000 loss, we're going to have $423,000. That's concerning because we only need to do that 2 years and it's gone, you know, so, so I think that's something you guys will have to tighten up and see, hey, what's inflated on the budget that we can, or what cost cuts that are cutting into the budget to tighten it up a little bit. I think some of it's going to be utilized with the ARPA money, potentially that ocean money, so we have $275,000 that could help build that fund balance, back it up, or at least offset expenses that we would utilize in the form of operating revenues that we're going to identify and that we pay with other funds, for instance. You can do it, fire contract, you guys always get a fire contract, you general fund monies, you could utilize ARPA money, so basically identify and use it, and that'll basically build your fund balance right back up, and whatever that fire contract is. So there's some things you guys can do, you just have to make a decision how you want to spend it. And we are running out of time, they said we have until 12/31/2024, obligate those funds, and if we have one more year, actually spend it. I recommend trying to spend it before that, just because if you have a contract that somehow doesn't come to fruition, then you technically, you can't re-obligate that. So, hey, I want to spend it for this, didn't have this, and spend it for this, and then it's too late. So I think we need to be very concrete on what we want to spend it on, obligate those funds, and try to utilize those.
So by tightening up the budget, what do you mean by that? By making sure that money is well budgeted, appropriated?
Yeah, exactly. And each cat, activity level, look through those.
So what you're saying is that when we approve the budget, basically the shortfall is because the budget was set up that we approved, it was really fat, where we wanted to spend the money, and maybe lean in other places where we had to adjust, right? Is that-
Exactly. I mean, like that road, you do 100,000 for a road expense this year, you're not going to do anything. So I would say, in a case like that, that could be amended down. Adjusted, or move to a different category, or over in a different category. You can do budget amendments, but they don't not to come to that. So I don't want to use this. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that. We forgot one thing. But anyways, that's great. So does everybody understand that as far as the board goes? What we ended up doing is we were in a tight spot, right? So when we were in a tight spot, we came out, we rolled off that budget, we reapproved the old budget. What ended up happening when we did that was we put money in places in the budget that we never intended to use. So therefore, that fund balance is stretched out. And so what we need to do is tighten that budget up. And correct me if I'm wrong, by making sure our numbers are correct. And so, and that's what we're intending to do now. So there's some adjustment.
Yeah, and like, for instance, we talked about the ARPA budget, we did identify some items in the general fund we wanted to utilize for the 2025 fiscal year. Well, then you have a budget item that was the increase in federal revenue by whatever that dollar amount is, it would increase, what you guys had previously done. So that's what we can see that. you guys obligated, you never spend it on a police station. So that's just money you guys earmark, and you can change it, reallocate it to something else.
I just want to clarify that, I think, it doesn't make any sense, I thought the money had to be spent for the lift station. It can be, if we want to spend it there.
Now, if you do that, you need to have a contract in place at 12/31. You can't change, but you can't, after 12/31 or 24, you can't change like contractors, because then all of a sudden that, there's a lot of rules to change. You really should talk to your attorney about that. We're gonna, you guys are gonna extend it to the 25 calendar year. You really should talk to your attorney, make sure you're allocating those funds properly, so, you know,
Did we move the money from the sewer fund to the general fund for your neighbor's, payroll?
We moved the,
So like whatever, like you and Corey are now getting paid all out of the general, that did get moved over to, okay, I'm just
No.
making sure that
That's a good point, because when we took office, the one thing I could see is that I knew that we're gonna have, we could have issues with the general fund. I was just looking at what I had available to me. And so I wanted to get those payroll expenses out of the general fund. Because if we develop down the road, we're probably gonna have to look at the sewer lift station, because we already were coming into these meetings and having a lot of pushback and input on replacing that sewer lift station. So I wanted to make sure that we kept it intact as best as we could. So that's, that's why it's in the budget when I went that route. So, but it seemed to pay off a little bit anyways, because we got some expense off the lift station for future. I figured if we did it for a year or two, and after we get through this big hump that we're in right now as a township, then we can look at our brothers here or do whatever we need to do, they can look at putting it back. So,
that's all I had to touch on, actually, like,
I really one last thing. So Ryan, basically what you're telling us is that if we tighten up our budget, our fund balance would be just fine, and we can move forward. We're not going to bankrupt the township.
yeah, I don't think it's there yet, but we gotta look at this, if somebody saw it was 400,000, we need half of it next year, that's what people said they deserve, so I think we need to look at it, utilize those grant funds, potentially utilize those, the funds from, the development agreement, so we have funds available, so those are some options. Look at future projects, I mean, especially when you have to cut it up a little bit, hey, when is the next road project? How are we going to do it? Is it 4 years down the road with the road commission? Start looking that out and see, get some estimates and costs and figure out, do we need to do a road commission? Do we need to get a vehicle operating money from the general fund? All of that can be funded. So that's the kind of stuff you got to look for, like a look, at some point, but, that's a big expense, so that's the kind of stuff with capital expenses that can be large. We need to kind of look at right now, multiple years, to figure out how to pay for it. We're really going to cut through. You really guys to kind of get that money to show surplus, so that we can start identifying maybe some of those capital expenditures and road projects or something else. Sure, yes.
Anybody have any more for Ryan?
you said we have until the end of December for the ARPA, so that's what you said.
I'll give you this.
Okay.
Yes, we need to have it. I really recommend consulting your attorney to make sure that whatever you do, please,
Overall, how would you rate this audit?
it was good. Basically, they can do 2 sets of books, compare, make sure they're recording the revenue for the receipt side, properly, and the disbursement side, because each of them have a party limit. So that's why it's important to have that check and balance between the two. So that was a recommendation. Receipt books, there's electronic receipts in the computer system, but none of the actual support. I recommend that we have a remittance advice from state of Michigan or wherever, keep that, have a receipt book that's pre-numbered, duplicate, and make sure you guys keep that. So that was not being done this past year. But there were electronic receipts. We needed to, there was, the receipt showed up in the computer system with the description of what it was. So, but I think we need to go with that next step for the receipt.
Do you want the board, the treasurer and the clerk's office to continue on with paper receipts, even though we flipped over to cash receipt and BSA, still do the paper receipts?
If you're doing with the SNA, I think you should just keep this form. You can utilize the SNA cash receipt module, it's great. It's a great system. So I think that the only thing I recommend is if somebody takes you, they got a stub that says what it's for, hey, this is for the cell phone tower for this month. How do I know what month it is without having that support from the application? And there were unrecorded transactions in the general ledger. This has been corrected, but we did there were some things that need to be recorded. We did the cash. So those are kind of nitpicky ones on that level. So those are advised to the level of material weakness or significant deficiency per se. So that's the next letter that we have, is the independent audit report, internal control, and financial reporting. So this one, there's a few things. First thing, segregation of incompatible duties. So that's a lack of segregation of duties. You guys only have, you do have more than 2 people because you have deputies, but it is limited to a certain extent of how many people you guys have in the full accounting process. Plus, at the time you work, you check it in, you report the treasurer. This comment's been on there for years. It's on probably 5% of our municipalities. So I don't anticipate this to go away. It's nothing you guys.
Why would you put that on for this municipality? Why would we?
You're a smaller municipality, so typically the ones that have a payroll clerk on staff, an accounts payable person right there on staff, we usually have a clerk, treasurer, deputies, and they'll probably have a couple more things. Every person has a part of the accounting process. Someone opens the mail, different than the person actually taking the money to the bank, and the other person reconciles everything. So there's a lot of checks and balances that we can have with people. So usually we'll see that with a full accounting staff, and we're open 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. So you'll see a lot of cities. Usually, sometimes we look at the go away, but I had one this week, and even the city has the same comment. We just don't have enough people to get away with this. The second comment also, yeah, sorry.
So, compare the township similar in size, we already have, it's very similar in terms of efficiency and procedure like that versus the township that has 40,000 people.
Yeah.
We're talking 30 people in that township.
Yeah. I'd say almost, probably every single one of think that one can easily be moved this next year, by doing this, budget workshops, so we can get the budget, monitoring, and
Thank you, Ryan.
Do you recommend amending monthly, quarterly?
I think you need to monitor your budget to actual. Technically, you're supposed to amend the budget before you go over in the budget item. So if you notice that you're getting close on certain areas, you might have to go monthly. A lot of people like to do it up close to the year, the US and a lot of countries do that, but I see some that do it monthly, so it really just depends on the need and how tight you guys are, and you want to start tracking those items. We need to amend it because you might be over, I recommend amending it.
This is a problem before with the board also, was it, or was it, did we have to do that before?
There's been budget overages before, I couldn't say the material amount or not, but, we had,
One reason why I bring that up to the board is because I'd like to monitor this thing as closely as possible. This thing being the budget, so as we go into our other meetings, we bring it up to the board, and put it out there, so hey, this is where we're at in our accounts, and instead of looking at profit and loss statements and just checks, then we can do our adjustments. The board did do earlier, resolution 2401, and I have it out in front of you. It's the way that we are correcting our budget from here on out. So we can amend a lot, not in such frequency, but I don't want to get the budget where it's out of sight, out of mind. And everybody understands it's up front, and we take a look at track that budget. But now we're going to amend by cost centers, and that's what we're going to do tonight. We're going to look at the budget. So, it'll be much easier to make sure that we appropriate the funds, so we don't jump over anything. But I really was nervous. It's like, let's not do this anymore, jump over. I know there was a couple of things in the past that I found with and we don't want to do that. So,
Can we get like this from now on,
Yeah.
instead of just the actual
yes.
account balances of
Yes.
what's?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we need,
Because then we can we can't tell where we're at if we don't have this.
no,
I can't tell what's
it's
in our
not.
checking, I can say, yep, we got the money, but that doesn't mean it's in that line item.
There's not enough there, it's just not working. And Rod and I were working, and Brian and I were talking, we want to get up, we want to get the board up to the audit, do the audit, make sure we get some good fund numbers, and then build the budget out, and make sure that we can tighten that budget out, because that's obviously how our fund balance show better, work better, so it's just been a process. So thank you so much for all your help, Brian, I appreciate it. Anyone else have any other questions?
For this resolution, it'll be done quarterly.
Yeah. If we need to, but I would love to just get it out there for everybody to see what we have for numbers. We addressed we had a couple of questions from the public. Really quick before you take it up, could you please address those questions, Ryan? Forwarded them on to you earlier, so I appreciate it.
We got a couple of them we took care of. I think the first one was 100,000 under revenue liability, what was it related to? So we went over that, was that development agreement that hasn't been utilized or spent or we want to. How the project plan is spent now, that's kind of up to you guys. You guys got to do some work on that. Originally, it normal, none of that kind of stuff, yeah, you probably be out of that with fund balance right now. But if you are planning on doing road projects, you have to do it. So that's something you guys have to do in the budget process. And that kind of goes back to the list of things we're going to talk about, and then, given the current financial situation, expected future expenditures in general, the general fund balance projected to be at the end of the fiscal year, again, I think you guys got to type up that budget, what actually is going to happen, that'll give you a better outcome. Okay, where we right now, we just said, hey, this is adopted, obviously, it's going to be $100,000 less than the prior year. I think you guys need to figure out how to put the grant funds, you're going to spend that portion of grant money, and then see what else expenses that you know are going to actually go. I think as much as, hey, that's a shot in the dark to a certain extent at the beginning of the year, which needs to change.
Okay. Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate it. I should write home. Long day for Ryan. So I guess that would bring us to, Rod. How you doing, Rod? Thanks for hanging out.
Doing great.
Yes. Can you hear us okay?
Yep, hear you perfect. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah. Everybody out there, hear Ron? Oh. So Ron is, once again, Ron is a senior government consultant. He's been working as our accountant, helping us work through the budget, making sure that we can tighten the budget up. Like Mr. Howell was saying earlier, make sure our fund balance works well, and then we can move forward, educated, and be very, very educated about the budget. So I guess, could you kind of enlighten us a little bit on what kind of steps we're taking here that let us down?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the presentation you had before is compare really well with what I want to talk about this evening as well, and hopefully help answer with some more clarity some of those questions asked previously. But before we get into that, one of the focuses that we had here was to adjust the budget format that the board and the public normally saw related to the township's budget. We had a number of goals and objectives in doing that. One, we want to make sure the budget is easier to understand. Budgets are very complex in local government, and whatever we can do to simplify the format allows people to grasp those numbers even better. The second thing we want to do is increase transparency and enhance your ability to use the budget as a management tool to manage those resources. And on the transparency side is making sure that both you as the board as well as the public have a clear understanding about where the money is coming from and where the money is going to. The third thing is compliance with PA2, which is the Uniform Budgeting Act. State statute has minimum requirements that you have to have in your budget. We want to make sure that those are included with your budget so you're compliant with state regulatory requirements. The third thing is the uniform charge accounts. This is another standard the state has that requires local units of government to use certain account numbers, and we wanted to make sure we reviewed those and updated those accordingly. At the same time, we wanted to simplify account numbers. You had a number of account numbers, and having too many accounts sometimes makes things unclear, and so tightening that up a little bit, I think, allows easier management of the budget. And the last thing we wanted to focus on, which is what we're going to talk about here in a little bit, is really refine your estimates that you had for your 25 budget. Reviewing those revenues and expenditures, as it was already said this evening, tighten those up to better reflect what you anticipate those revenues and expenditures would be at the end of the year. And so I know you guys have the budget document before you, but I'll just share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see that. So I'm not going to go through this in detail, but again, the goal was the accounting software that the township uses doesn't really facilitate a format that met all of those objectives that I talked about previously. And so the format that we were able to put together does three things. One, provides some actual historical information that's easy to see so that when you're reviewing the budget, you can kind of analyze the historical trends, as well as provide clarity in terms of what you're asking for in the future. We also did some things like adding notes. This is part of that transparency. It's difficult when you say something like, swamp tax, people aren't going to know what that is. And so by providing a description, the lay people can look at this and can understand it a little bit better in terms of what are we trying to do? Where's this money coming from? Where's that money going to? When we look at a budget, you really should have kind of three goals. One is obviously you're allocating resources. Everybody understands that the purpose of the budget is to allocate those limited resources that you have next year to accomplish that. But beyond that, a budget is the tool in which you implement your vision. As board members, you're trying to serve the public, you're trying to implement that vision, and the way that you do that is by adopting the budget that allows you to spend those resources to achieve that objective. And the last thing that we want a budget to do is we want a system that allows us to review and manage those resources. You ultimately have a fiduciary responsibility as elected officials. You're using other people's money, other people's resources, and part of your role and responsibility is to understand the budget that you had before and manage that budget on a proactive basis, not on a reactive basis. And so ultimately, we hope that this budget will help you allocate your resources effectively and efficiently, and ultimately positively impact the community. So that's the kind of the overriding goal and objective. The last thing I'll talk about before we get into some specifics is you need to recognize that while the budget's primary purpose, as mentioned, is allocating resources for next year, or in this case, this current year, because we're updating this current year budget, it's really a long-term document, right? Because the decisions you make today are impacting the future. And so when we talk about things like fund balances, we talk about doing new things or making changes, you have to not only think about how does that impact next year's budget, but how is that going to impact our community for the long term. As you know, once government starts doing something, it's very difficult to stop doing something. So when you adopt new expenditures or modify your revenues, it's hard to make those changes over the long term. So you want to always be thinking about how are these changes impacting our community, both from a financial perspective, but obviously a quality of life perspective as well. So, what are some of the changes that we did in the budget? I'm not going to go through everything. You guys have the budget before you, but I want to highlight some of the key changes that we are making, not only in format, but also versus what you originally adopted for this fiscal year versus what is being presented in terms of modifying the budget to tighten that budget up, as we said. The first one was related to taxes. Previously, you guys had budgeted about $129,000 for taxes for 25. Based upon your current millage rate and your current taxable value, we anticipate that close to be $140,000. So it's a nice positive increase. Donations, we also increased those because you've been proactively working to get donations related to the Goshen attorney fees. Those are monies you've already received in your budget this year. We want to reflect those as revenues as well. Zoning is a new function that you've taken responsibility for, but that also brings some revenue. So we increased revenues for zoning by about $4,500. MEDC grants, there's a grant for the stone hatchery park at about $22,000. So we increased the revenues to reflect that money coming in. The biggest change is related to ARPA. And that was already talked about quite a bit previously, but there's about $175,000 that you guys have sitting in under revenue. And what we show in the budget is use of those dollars. I'll talk a little bit later about what my recommendations and what you should do moving forward with those funds, but those impact on the revenue side. The expenditure side, we don't have as many large changes here, but we did make a lot of small changes to individual line items, so a lot more line items. And so we made changes, some, just a few $1,000s here or there. I won't go through some of those. But some of the changes we did make is with the buildings and ground. You had budgeted $25,000 in capital expenditures. Looking at, we only have about 5 months, 6 months left in the budget. Doesn't look like you have those, so reduce that to 1,000. Personnel services, that would include services such as my first time. You guys had a budget about $250. We've increased that to about $20,000. Highways, as I mentioned earlier, you had about $108,000 budgeted for highways. Based on the current plans, we've reduced that to about $22,000. Your cleanup program, you had budgeted about $8,700. In reality, that program's already done for this year. You spent about $5,200, so we've reduced that. Overall, the impact really is shown if you go all the way to the bottom of the budget, and that is your revenues over expenditures. So for the modified or updated budget, based upon using ARPA funds, showing some increased revenues, increasing some expenditures, decreasing some expenditures, overall we're showing revenues exceeding expenditures by about $35,000. So adding to your fund balance, which is a very positive position. Keep in mind, though, that this is done by one-time expenditures, and that's the ARPA dollars. So if you were to remove $175,000 in ARPA dollars, the use of fund balance would be significant. Now, you have to balance that with you also have a number of large one-time expenditures as well, primarily attorney fees. And so one of the things that you want to think about in your budget is whether or not you have a statutory, a structural deficit within your budget. In other words, do your recurring revenues and your recurring expenditures match up, or are your expenditures greater than those revenues? If they are, you're going to continue to eat away with fund balance. Now, one of the concerns, and this was talked earlier on, was, what is the appropriate level of fund balance that you should have? And so, based upon the current estimates, your fund balance is going to end up at the end of 25, based upon these current estimates, at about 60%. Well, how does that stack up? Well, the important thing to note here is that in 2022, your fund balance is $626,000. And what we're showing by the end of 2025, that's going to drop down to approximately $458,000. So about a $200,000 drop. Now that in itself is not alarming if it's planned and if it's known. The purpose of fund balance is for two reasons. You keep fund balance for unplanned, unexpected events. So it's the roof blowing off was an example that Brian had used before. So something that you don't plan for, you don't know that's coming, and all of a sudden you have a large expenditure. The other reason you have fund balance is to save up for things you do know about. So capital purchases, large purchases that you need to undertake to save up. And so the question always becomes, well, how much money should I have set aside? And that's a difficult question because if you have phenomenal budget where your revenues and expenditures are almost spot on what you estimate them to be at the beginning of the year versus the end of the year. If you have a great capital improvement plan, which you know what those future expenditures are, and overall you don't anticipate a lot of unplanned unexpected events, you can have a relatively low fund balance. But without knowing that or not having a status, then you have to be more conservative and have a larger fund balance. And when we look at the medians for townships, for general law townships, the median is about 151%. And for charter townships, it's about 125%, 130%. So previously in 21-22, you were right at the median of those other charter townships. But I will say that even though you're a charter township, you look at our charter townships, they tend to be a lot larger than you guys are, so it's probably a better comparison to compare yourself to a general law township, which again has that closer to that 150%. So the concern would be is that now, what I'm seeing is a large dip in your use of available fund balance. And so going forward, it's going to be very critical that even though this year, because we're recommending to use the ARPA dollars, you stabilize that. In future years, it's going to be really important for this board to analyze those revenues and look at opportunities to raise revenues and increase revenues, because ultimately the recommendation would be that you probably need to increase your fund balance slowly over time. And then also at the same time look at expenditures. Where are there opportunities to reduce those expenditures over time? Because you can't do one, you really got to do both, because there's no silver bullet at the end of the day. So where does that take us in terms of next steps? Well, first of all, let's talk about ARPA. So it was mentioned by Brian from UHY, you guys have ARPA dollars that are sitting there under revenue. And the previous plan that the board would have was to use that money within the sewer system. I recommend that local units of government consider not doing that for a couple of reasons. One, ARPA dollars is one-time money. You're never going to get it again, right? Hopefully, the federal government never bills all this money ever again, because we see the consequences of it. And when you use that money, you want to try to use it to be transformational, and more importantly, impacting all residents. And so the problem by spending in a sewer system for the sewer dollars is that you're only benefiting those ratepayers. And those ratepayers are the ones that should be paying for the maintenance of that system, the repair maintenance of that system. And so if you set it there, now all citizens gain the same benefit for the use of those dollars. The second thing, and it was brought up before, is that your fund balance in the sewer system is okay, right? It's not excessive, it's not low. Frankly, you need to make sure you have a good capital improvements plan, and once you have that, you can then better assess whether your net position in your sewer system is appropriate. But again, my recommendation would be that that money should be spent in the general fund, which is why we presented the budget with those dollars. So how do you do that? Well, as was mentioned earlier, under the federal guidance, you have to obligate these monies before December 31st of this year. And obligate means you have to enter into contracts. So you can't simply say, well, we as the board are going to spend the money on X, Y, Z. You actually have to have some financial commitment to pay those dollars. If you don't do that, if you miss this deadline, then you've got to get this money back to the feds. Nobody wants to do that, right? Because if you give it back to the feds, your citizens aren't going to gain the benefits from that. So the easiest solution to spend that money is to identify an existing expenditure that you've already spent the money on in your budget, and then that allows you to move that money from this unearned revenue that's currently setting in to an actual revenue within your budget. The impact of that is, as you can see from what we presented here, is that your fund balance then gets positively impacted, right? It's going to go up by that $175,000. And when you look at your budget, the easiest thing to identify that's a large expenditure is your public safety dollars. So you guys spend about $113,000 on public safety. And so under ARPA, to spend that money, you have to use it under allowable category. One of the allowable categories is revenue loss. And so all local government gets to take a standard allowance up to $10 million. In your case, your full amount, $175,000. And all they have to do is identify a government service. You spend it on a government service, which in essence is anything you spend the money on today. It could be employee salaries, it could be buying new vehicles, anything, and again, the recommendation would be in the general fund, that's an expenditure during the period of performance. So that starts with, when did COVID start? 21, so March of 21 to basically now. So in other words, in your guys' case, the easiest thing to identify is public safety dollars. You take 2 years of public safety dollars and you money as a revenue. If you guys take that action, the advantage is now we've spent the money under ARPA. Now we no longer have to worry about this deadline of December 31st of this year. You fill out one more report come March of 25, and then you guys are done with $100. You don't have to worry about any more compliance issues, anything else. If you try another tax aid, which is say, well, we're going to obligate the money, we're going to spend it by the end of 2026, you have some complexities there that we won't get into. But again, I highly recommend all of the governments should be spending this money before the end of this year, get it done with, and move on, so you don't have to worry about that. So that's the first thing, is next steps. Record our money. The next thing, and you guys already talked about this, and that's monitoring. As a board, you have that fiduciary responsibility. Make sure that every month you have a budget to expenditure report before you. You review that report to understand where money's coming from, where money's going to, what's happening in your budget. And as part of that monitoring, identify any accounts that start to run over. Now, one clarification to that is that when you adopt your budget, I believe you guys are adopting your budget, which most local governments do, by the activity. So what does that mean? That means that, in this case, if we look at professional services, it doesn't matter if, in this case, I'll pick on your audit services, that if you guys budgeted $4,000 and they sent the bill and it's $4,005, excuse me, that's over budget, right? But really what matters is the total department over budget. So you just want to manage and monitor that on a monthly basis. If you do notice any of those that are coming over budget, then you should do a budget adjustment. So you should either do a budget adjustment at the time that you're approving a contract, if you know you're going to go over budget at that point, or during that monthly monitoring process that you should be doing those budget adjustments. The last recommendation that I have related to budget adjustments is set a meeting the last week and a half of your fiscal year. So just before your fiscal year is going to end, set a special meeting with the board. They give you one last chance to print out that expenditure report, review all of those expenditures, look at any accruals that might be happening for money that you have to report back, and make any adjustments that 3 or 4 days before your fiscal year ends, and that reduces the probability you'll get that finding that you have this year related to your budget being over. So it's just an easy thing to do as one last item. And the last thing we've already talked about is that you really need to take a special look at your revenues and a special look at your expenditures and really have a critical eye on what types of changes and adjustments can be made. As an example, you guys have made the decision to take the responsibility back for zoning because that is going to benefit your community for the long term. Well, that creates an expense, right? Well, what are you going to do to offset that expense? Because it's a new expense, the board has not had that in previous years. You want to make sure that you have a mechanism to make sure that you can either reduce expenses in some other area or increase revenues in some other area, or a combination of the two to make sure that you can maintain that status quo of a healthy fund balance and healthy management of your finances. So that's a lot that I threw at you, but hopefully that paired well with your audit presentation, and I'll be glad to answer any specific questions.
So the ARPA money, so the ARPA money that's on here currently is now in the general fund?
After we approve it, we'll go to a slide over the general fund. Then what the idea is to find a place where we can utilize those ARPA funds so we don't lose them. We'll be closer
I'm
to
just
the
getting confused, because it was in the treasurer, it was in the sewer fund, now I just want to make sure that.
Ryan, both Ryan and Rod both urged us to look at that and to approve that, so we have more of a workability. Mainly because, like what Rod said, is like we use the ARPA funds in that sewer account. And so we go into the people who are on the utility broad stroke for everybody that's in this township. I mean, there's a lot of other things that can happen, or needs to happen with the budget also, how we budget for those towers that the township has. It should be in the general fund at all, or any of that internet stuff that's going on here. It should be in its own separate budget, kind of like a utility. There's only a certain amount of people that are on it. And the whole board, as well as us, has a question how many people does it service? It doesn't service the whole township. It only services a few people, and we haven't gotten an answer for it. So it should be in its own budget, managed appropriately for that. Then we can find out whether or not the township actually can afford it or not. Right? So this breakdown actually with Rod helping us through and Ryan putting his input in on it and how the township needs to go forward. If you notice, the revenues are listed in green at the front. So you can see all the revenues, and there's also descriptions on revenues. And then you get down to the other part, it shows the expenditures that the township has. Now, it looks like, now I'm going to add a little bit to this, but it looks like there's a lot of expenditures here, but it's just the line item that Rod kind of touched on earlier in the numbers regarding those expenditures underneath that action. Okay, so the action, or for the action would be the activity rather, not the action, but like elections would be an activity, assessing would be an activity, clerks would be an activity, and then what the board does now is we can assign the number to that activity, and now the clerk's office and treasurer's office can go down and divvy that money out underneath that activity versus fit. What that does for us now is allows us to amend the budget without having to bring it forward every time that we have to move money to the board. And what that does is allows the board to pay bills much more efficiently and that sort of thing. But by keeping it close to the activity, we still have a cap. The board still has a cap on the amount of spending that can happen in the treasurer's and the clerk's office. So as you read through the audit and how this is set up, or not audit, sorry, revenue budget, revenues are all front, all in green, expenditures break down by activity, and then you can see what happens in that activity. So I think I'm pretty happy with it as far as the layout for people to see and read and understand it and digest it. The next thing I want to also touch on is the first two columns that you see after the activities. You'll see the blue dot. Let's say if you look underneath expenditures, Department 101, Township Board. Once you go past that blue, you'll see the first column. All right, and then the second column. Those are past years. But you'll notice there's two columns that are blank after moving to the right on expenditures. You'll notice those are blank. Well, those are the previous 2 years that we don't have any data on since we had the changed over. We're working on getting that data, but it disappeared out of our books. And that was one of the things that we were having a tough time with transition. All right, so finding that data to pick up our budget and keep moving forward. That's why. I wish you could touch on this when Ryan was here. That's why when Ryan came in, he said, "Hey, you need to work these books a little bit, get some more data so you can see exactly where you're lying now." And they're working with us in order to capture some of that data back. We want to get those numbers back in there as best as we can, and move forward so we have some historical record. Once again, if you look at the 23-24, those are pretty accurate numbers there. They're the best we could get. That's why we waited this long in order to release these documents, so we have some historical data to look at to know exactly where we're at. I mean, we were feeling around, we were doing a pretty good job, but it was more like dust than 12 fine tuners, if I use an analogy there. So we were feeling around, we could get the budget under control and understand where we were putting it, but we really didn't have any data to really show and point where we were at. We also didn't have any footnotes. So moving forward after the description, you're going to have a column that's going to have notations on it coordinate capital outlay projects or expenditures. The reason for that is so that we have further historical data so we can see how to set up a budget moving forward. This is things that weren't there before, and these are things that we were trying to establish. Once again, just looking forward after we move to the next column, we have the 2024-25 budget approved. That's what we approved when we came out in the spring. And then the activity is obviously the activity of the budget and the line items that we've had so far up to date. That's everything we have in our books. And then the 2024-25 requested budget, that's what I'm bringing up to the board for approval. What that does is Rod and I have looked through the budget and looked at it, and I've worked with Corey and Rob and Jillian, is we were trying to identify, okay, which way is this economy moving? Do we really need all this money here? We need to tighten this budget up. So what those amendments to the budget are actually in the requested budget, which is actually the adoption of a new budget, which was requested. This action was requested by our people. So bring it forward, get your amendments in so you can keep the budget moving forward, and then do it all separately. That's why we're doing it. So it's a secondary budget meeting. But that's how it reads out. So once again, at 2021, 22, 23, historical data is not there, unfortunately, but you can kind of calculate it from the previous 2 years, the 2020 budget and 2021 budget. Then you can kind of get an idea of which direction the contracts are going. Yes?
Can I ask maybe a ridiculous, obvious question? 2021, 2022 data missing. Was it deleted? Was it deliberately being hidden? Or was it taken? What can we conjecture about when we came in this office and what people continue to ask us, where's the data? We go back and count.
The 21, 22, 22, 23 was online. That's where I pulled all the data
That's where
from.
you pulled.
It's just not in the,
It's not.
it's just not in their
Yeah.
system.
Okay, so what do we,
And
that's
that's,
including that without like 20 fingers or casting blame, I'm saying, it's not a question, maybe why? Why is there, is this data missing?
well, and I didn't leave it off there to prove a point of any kind at all. We're trying to do it before we load that data up on it, because I think that's what we're going to end up resorting to. You know, before we load that up, we want to get it out for our folks. And check it with folks, make sure that it's all set. Now, Ryan does have some information that he pulls at his place, up in the DHY, but not much. And so we're working on trying to capture this up just to verify the numbers that are supposed to be forward, because it is historical data and it would be nice to see some of that. And if there is any notes, once again, there wasn't a lot of notes explaining capital improvement projects. And I really wanted to touch on what Rod also said about capital improvement projects and what it can do to fund equity. And I don't think I think it's been missed by a lot of people out there in the public, right? So we have a separate budget for the lift station. We're moving forward with the lift station. Right? We'll still continue to pay that those fees. We're moving forward with weight trim as we work on the replacement of that sewer system. That's a separate budget, and I believe that budget is going to be able to handle it. Stuff that we have there already. But when you're looking at the general fund budget, we all want roads, and I sure as heck want roads too. But we really have to be very careful moving forward, like Rod and Ryan is saying. We have to have a capital outlay in place. So what we can do is we can say, hey, we're going to do these road improvements this year, and we also have some stone hatchery stuff, like the stone hatchery grant, for example. That has to happen now, right? So there's some more stuff coming out about stone hatchery. I just got a Tim earlier. So that has to happen. So we know that's a capital outlay that's going to come off the general fund. What that will do is our fund balance, we'll collapse it, from where we're at right now, and, we need to be aware of that. So even if the board rolls over, I would hate to see anybody else, come into this situation, it's a hard enough job as it is already, but be crucified for the way that the budget's operated. You know, once again, like I said earlier, it needs to be understood on what affects the budget, but before the general public needs to understand it also. So when we start to accomplish project after project and not let that fund balance come up, we're going to drain our accounts. That's why I sent out, you can see the reporting data we put out the last meeting, and I threw it out here to the board again. It's over here. You see the 200% fund balance budget there, the reserve budget, and then we go down to 150%. And as Rod and Ryan talked about earlier, you know, you'll see it start to collapse. Well, I wanted to know what was collapsing that budget, like what were we involved with? Because I know there was capital improvement projects involved in that collapse that budget. So where do we put our money? And I do have more of that data, and I'll release that to you guys can check it out. But I don't have it in front of me. I don't want to bore anybody furthermore than what we've got going on in this meeting. But, you know, there are different capital improvement projects, like Ryan was saying earlier, roads, there were road projects, bridge projects, there were projects that the bridge that we took down from the academy and brought it over here. We had engineering costs approved on that bridge also to see if it could reach across the river. There were all these different things, and they were throwing money at different projects, but they weren't on a capital improvement project. So you have these compounding projects, which in turn sank the budget. So that's why Ryan and Rod are out here saying, now listen, you guys are okay, right? Would that be a safe estimate to say, Rod, if we're okay at this point in time?
Yeah, definitely. Part of the thing is that you guys understand that you're going through a transition. For example, a lot of the expenditures that you have within your budget this year are one time. You have line services. Next year, you won't need those services. You're setting up zoning operations, so you have consultants there. And so those are one time. But I also, my previous role was I worked at the state of Michigan in a regulatory capacity, and part of that role was identifying communities that either challenge operationally or fiscally. And so I come from a very conservative perspective of saying that, yes, while you're okay now, status quo would be a concern, right? And so you have to be very proactive on that. I will add one thing too. You mentioned the capital improvements plan. It's important to know that's required by statute. So the Planning Enabling Act requires you as a charter township, because you have a sewer system, that every single year you have to, technically, your planning commission has to develop and adopt, the board by association, a capital improvements plan. And that capital improvements plan should cover all the large expenditures, not what those minimum requirements are. So the minimum requirements is that has to cover a period, I think, 6 years. I recommend that your capital improvements might go up much longer than that, 10 to 15 years, and then include more items. And so I think that to answer that question of how are you doing, the more that you get some of those best practices in place, the stronger that you guys will be and have a stronger base to go forward and build upon.
I don't want to get off track here, but I do have a quick question for you regarding capital improvement plans. What does it take to create, look for the words here, but to create the most accurate, most effective possible capital improvement plan? What would that look like, Rod, just real quick?
So at a minimum, it's simple, right? At a minimum, it just needs to be a list with dollar amounts and years of those dollar amounts going out that 6 or 7 years by minimum. But to have a stronger tool, it's going to take some work. What I normally recommend is that you hire an engineer, because the engineer can go through and look at your township hall. Look at the roof was mentioned earlier. What do you need to replace your roof? You guys have any idea? Probably not, right? And so by looking at that, and looking at your parks, all those other facilities, you can get a better gauge of what some of those large expenditures are. The roads are the biggest one that I'm always concerned about, because you can look at your assets and you can figure that out. But the roads are technically the county's assets. But as we know, the county doesn't have enough money to maintain those roads at an appropriate level. And so there's a large reliance on our municipalities to help fund and pay for those road systems as well. That one's a little more complicated because you need to partner with the road commission to look at an asset management plan or a capital plan for what types of investments do you guys need to have in your roads and the next, again, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, so you can get a better gauge of that. Other large expenditures I'd like to see included are things like your comprehensive development plan. Why that's not a capital item, as you know, to build a comprehensive plan, it can be very expensive. And you have to update those periodically. So I'm working with another township right now. They haven't updated theirs. I forget what they're going to spend, but they're probably going to spend, they're a much larger township, but over $100,000 on that plan. Well, again, it's not a capital item, but if you know that in 8 years you have to spend $100,000, why not put it on a piece of paper so that you know for that, you can plan for that, and so then when you have questions about, well, is my fund balance appropriate or not, you can look down the road and see, yeah, it's okay now, but if we do all these large expenditures, it won't be. And so, using that document to its fullest extent can be beneficial. I guess the thing to take away is, though, small incremental improvements. Tomorrow, you're not going to have a perfect capital improvement plan, but if you start with something, you're better than you were the day before. If when you adopt your budget come this March, you improve that a little bit. The year after that, you improve it a little bit better. 2 or 3 years from now, you'll be way stronger position, whether that's you as the board or as your board changes and resolves you have that base infrastructure for the township to continue to grow and prosper.
Wait a second, what do you mean by resolves? Our board is going to resolve?
No, nothing. Township never go away, so that's the good thing about local government, so.
Hear that, Joe? Okay. Appreciate it. Who else, anybody else have any?
Yes.
So I just want to go back to the comment on the ARPA real quick, just to clear up. Sorry, can you ask that question? So again, that money is sitting in your sewer, your unearned revenue, but as Ryan said, because it's just sitting there, you can do anything you want as a board. So the board needs to take some type of formal action to allocate that ARPA dollars, and then you'll be able to record that, and then it'll be done with that.
Are you saying that once we approve this, it automatically amends all the stuff that, so we don't have to do them individually?
No.
So then, under zoning, you guys have $40,000 in there. What's that 40 grand for?
That 40 grand is the paid rent, the zoning administrator, and then any other costs that we may get with Williams and Brooks, who's our engineering firm that would help us design out the ordinances. Once again, that's an unknown budget item, so we don't know where we're at, but we want to fund that area that we go for. We can amend that also.
So we're gonna spend that grant money for the stone hatchery. We're matching that out of the Parks and Rec, right? Because is that a matching grant?
That's a matching grant, so what would happen is, it's $108,000 we need to spend, all right, for the grant. Yes, 108. That's, now that we've had these conversations, you can see why I want to be proactive in repairing the facility, but we also have to be very cautious on others. So we'll get $108,000. We have to put out $108,000. Not all that money needs to go all the way, but in turn we're going to get a $54,000 check. Okay, in order for reimbursement. Now, my previous conversations with Roy Place, with the grants funded through, Tim and I I were talking, and we talked about doing it out for 3 years and paying out for 3 years and starting to do improvements down at the town of the Stone Hatchery. I think some of that has changed. I need some clarification on it before I go forward, but it looks like we're going to have to spend some decent, relatively decent amount of it, maybe 20,000. That's why I wrote $20,000 there, 22,000 right in that account to get our first make our first for the grant. So it's a couple different stages.
So is the total 108 or the total is going to be 216?
Total will be 108 for the grant
Okay, so
reimbursement.
50, we would come up with 54, and then the grant gives us 54.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but we,
Do you have any questions for Ron?
yeah, oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, let's get back to Ron. Ron, sorry. Sorry, Ron. Do you have any questions? You got questions today? Yeah.
Well, one of the biggest items obviously is our, the city, $110,000 public safety, has that been,
Yeah,
that's all, as far as we're not, cutting it back on our protection, fire.
Well, you have any questions?
We're under contract.
Yeah, we're under contract, so that's a contract. Does anybody have any questions for Ron? Let's go ahead and keep making out.
Anything you need. But I am expensive if we are talking about your budget. So the quicker you give me a phone, the quicker you save money too. So I'll stay as long as you need to.
And if you look over the self-reporting for the audit stuff, or no? You guys just do that.
No, we just did it with Ron. So,
Okay, so I should ask for Ryan.
anybody else? If you got another question, get over to Ron. Okay, well, thanks, Ron. I appreciate you. Okay, well, I appreciate it. Thank you. We'll be in touch. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.
We have to spend the money before.
Correct. But this is the problem with the 108. We've gotten to certain, we have fielded a few quotes, right, for the, that would contribute to 108. But obviously it's changing times and inflation, that sort of thing. I don't look at the 108 as being just the 108. I mean, I'm trying to look at it and say, okay, it's going to be 108 but plus. Because I'm not sure what the overages are going to be. And you can see why I'm looking at a budget like that in these projects like this. I have to make sure, everybody knows here, they build garages and put, concrete in their driveways, that sort of thing. You know there's overages, and this isn't going to be any different. So we have to be sensitive to that, the fund balance, and so how do you budget for that to make sure that you move forward in appropriate manner so you just don't spend money on nothing sailors. We had a lot of one-time expenditures with this recall. We had a lot of one-time expenditures that resulted in us buying new equipment, all right, to remove ISI out of the township business. We had phones, one-time expenditures for that. We had one-time expenditures for, attorney fees, like Rod mentioned. We had to just to help us make that transition. What else was there? There's been numerous one-time fees, so we're not going to see in the next budget. We don't have to do that going forward. It's just the growing pains of taking over, doing a recall, and putting a hardship on the township like this. But I feel we've done, and so what Ryan and Rod have seen so far is the same thing. We've done a very good job. And I'm not patting myself on the back, but a very good job of one, not having full access to the budget for a while, and then having to purchase all the things that we had to purchase in order to get the township up and running, keep running, and then still manage that budget as best we could come out like this. So those one-time expenditures, like it's software, it's hardware, it's all that. A lot of that stuff isn't going to be there. And looking at the budget now, we can go down through it and verify you know, and anybody has a budget out there asking questions, please, we'll post it up online after tonight. So, if there's a question about an expenditure or an activity or any of that stuff. The other thing is too, where we ended up spending money on is we went down through with Rod, and the first thing that stuck out to Rod is we had to update all of the numbers for the account. So, for example, if you just look at the front page of revenues, underneath taxes 404 activity, you'll see that there's like, if you take a look at the first number there, it's 101-000-402.000. That's a new numbering system. Some of the numbers have been changed by the state, so we had to update all of that also. And along with, if you take a look at this budget, as opposed to previous budgets, you'll notice that not all the line items are underneath activities, because once again, we cleaned that budget up a little bit more, made it a little tighter, so that we just work in the areas that we're working with. Another thing that we found out through all of our travels on this budget road is that we don't want to just have a placeholder as $1 anymore. They don't want that there. They want to say $1 equals another $1 or another $1. You add them all up, and before you know, you got 20, 30, 40 bucks that's not supposed to be in the budget. That's never going to be appropriated for anything. So we don't want to do that going forward. What we want to do is identify our revenues, understand what revenues are coming in, and then say, hey, at the next meeting, at the next budget meeting, board needs to take a look at it and say, okay, this is where we're going to put our attention. Okay, and then we're going to put the money there. So, like, there's going to be reoccurring fees. That would be the deficit inside our budget, like was mentioned earlier. So what we're doing right now is we're looking at, hey, so the board understands exactly what the township costs to run, right? These are the reoccurring fees that don't change much. Then we can take a look at that ledger and move forward with the budget. But with all this work that's been done, this should be very, very simple, very effective, and very efficient to approve another budget forward. So, I'm sorry to talk about that. Let's get started. Now I'm talking. Anybody has any questions on what you're seeing from me? Yeah.
So your donations and that is for
No, we didn't pull the GoFundMe out of the GoFundMe stuff.
It's still there.
It's still there, it's gotta be resolved.
It'll be with it.
Yeah. So once again, it'll be on March, rather than we'll just hang out there until we spend it, and then we'll go into the market.
So the restricted, it says restricted attorney and restricted donation. It's just, those are only for, can only be used for attorney fees? When it says restricted attorney, is that?
That was why, that was for, we're talking to our attorneys, that somebody needs to set up some of these funds, and then obviously Rod can help us out.
But that can only be used for attorney fees, or not?
Restricted attorneys, so as you're seeing, which one is it?
It's all the way down to the bottom of the first page.
And then what do you have, where do you have?
It's like 12 down.
Yeah, that's for attorney fees also.
So that's the only thing it's used for. Okay, I just want to make sure.
Because we didn't want it to go in general.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay.
You want to do it? Well, if nobody has any other questions, I'd like to move to the consent agenda, see if we could have a motion to approve. New budget format for the general budget and the new sewer budget format, which will get adjusted over, and the amendments to the general sewer budgets, which includes the money and any other.
So the sewer budget looks like this? too?
Yes, it'll be a lot smaller.
A lot smaller.
Much smaller. Okay, I've got a Second by Rob. Further discussion? No further discussion, we move to a vote. Sure.
Thorne,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Richard,
Yes.
Hayes,
Yes.
Wilson, yes, Regal, Cruz,
Yes. Okay, motion carries, thank you very much for it. And then that brings us to our public comment session. Is your committee with us? Any public comment? Joe?
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
On the lawyer's fees, we have a total of $1,000 on lawyer's fees, that's my first question. My second question is that my understanding of the lawsuit is that we lose the lawsuit, we pay Goshen's fees as well, is that not correct?
No, that's not correct. So, a couple questions there. We won't be paying Goshen's fees. Okay. Goshen fees at Goshen Cruise, they're paid by Goshen their attorneys. As far as the attorney fees go, are ongoing, they're gathering those attorney fees. And so those are working on that.
It was there somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's really close. That's a really close figure. Probably minus, I would say, if you take a look at the budget here for,
as requested, right? Just keep in mind that all of the fees are not the, oh, you're looking, he's looking for this.
yeah.
So I'm looking at the invoices that I sent to.
That's good, which is that.
So, I thought that was, they weren't suing us for damages, or are they suing for damages, or lawyer's fees, that's what I.
Oh, no, yeah,
So definitely my question is wrong.
yeah, no, good point. And I'm going to be releasing a replacement update with the township here. And then, get some information, but Goshen is just giving us a replacement contract. Okay. And then there is no, they're not the source for the attorney fees moving forward. We do have a countersuit, or a counterclaim, I should say counterclaim, not countersuit, on Goshen at this point, where we requested that they give attorney fees for what we found in discovery, and those types of things. But once again, I have to unfortunately say that this is in the lawsuit, you got to refer back to those papers and what was written there. Now we have the most accurate information you can get. And you can find that information out in the courts. So we've asked that we pay our counterclaim. They're not going to come after us for attorney fees. So does that kind of answer that a little bit? And what was the other part of the question, Joe, or something else?
Well, this thing is dragging on and on and on, and it appears by looking at the documents that I looked at, that the township is kind of in a losing position.
Okay, yeah, that's okay. So what has happened, what I can say about it, just referring back to what happened with it, is the court has awarded a stay to the township. Okay? So what that means is normally you say stay like, hey, you're done. The stay means that we're going to stop the court case. Okay? All things stop. And we're going to stop until the Sixth Circuit rules on the injunction that the judges put on the township. This is a great question. And so
I'm not trying to make a gotcha question, just so we're clear.
yeah.
It's not a gotcha question.
No, I understand. And so, however, moving forward, Goshen had 14 days once that ruling was put in, that they needed to comply and submit papers to us, submit documents that we didn't get in discovery. that the judge ruled and said that Goshen needed to turn over. Now, Goshen's attorneys and Goshen needed to turn over. That part of the discovery will keep ongoing until it's finished in 14 days. I think it's going to be up this week, 14 days. So there should be some more discovery docs coming in. Then our attorneys will review those docs and then move forward. And basically, everything is at play in the Sixth Circuit. Just focused on the injunction. Everything having to do with the development agreement side of things stays in the district court. So it stops, it stays until the Sixth Circuit or the Court of Appeals rules on injunction. So I said that a couple of times. You have to look at it as two different parts to the lawsuit. One, injunction, because we protested the injunction on the township, and then the original part of the suit, which is just the development agreement. So right now we're working on this. The development agreement stops. So that's where the court case is.
So just a follow-up on that. So because that's the status that you described, is Goshen in a position where they can break down and start doing anything? Or is that how the circuit was?
Well, it will be, and that's a good question also because we don't have any Goshen at all. We haven't been in contact with Goshen, we haven't plans to see from Goshen, we haven't had any outreach as far as, permitting or any of that stuff. I mean, it's been mentioned time and time again in the court cases, from Goshen to the townships. But that's all I can say about that. So if Goshen was to submit, then we'll see what they ask for, and we'll go from there. But they have never contacted us or so yeah, I gotta go here and I'll get right to you. Yep.
I was just wondering out of curiosity, with ISI being on, how much was that costing the township in a year?
So
And the towers, what did that cost the taxpayers?
So in just my past weeks, it was pretty substantial.
Like, can you give,
And you just saw when we came in, there was a lot of stuff. And obviously, it needs to be understood that there was stuff being built. So there was a higher bills increased. Because there was a lot of work being done on IT, trying to get in. But in my working with ISI and noting what was going on, that's why I brought it to the board and then change services because they are a contracted service. But I'm putting them in the process of putting all those. Most of them, I won't get all of them because some of the charges are going to be for. I don't know, some of the charges up $20 here on a whim, and then maybe $100 over here. But what I did is I've gone back on that graph to where you start to see the 200% drop, and I looked at where all our drops were that pulled out the major expenditures. And then I worked my way back down. I'm almost there. Just so if people ask questions like this, I can give you kind of a rough estimate. But remember also that the ARPA funds were also used to put the towers up. Now that's our money. It's not Goshen money. It's COVID money, COVID relief funds that were given to the townships. And it was used, but still, I view that still as taxpayer money that we use for that purpose. It was a singular purpose.
okay, but the other part of the question is when they decided to use our money for these towers or whatever, that is number one brought to the constituents to where we had a say, or was this behind the scenes of secret?
I can't answer that, but I can tell you moving forward is that if I'm still on the board, even if I'm not on the board, anybody that comes on this board, leads this board, really should have, I don't know if this is the thought here. They really should have a public hearing. Have a public hearing, but that's only fair to the taxpayers, it's our money. And then it also shows these expenditures. I mean, moving forward, if I'm lucky enough to have the people let me grace this chair for another 4 years, moving forward, we'll have public hearings on these things and these issues, and then I can get some input, because I'll tell you what I don't want to do. I don't want to, and this is why I was sensitive to the old board, and this is why I'm sensitive to the old board. I don't know why they did what they did, and I can only speculate. I think it's out of good faith, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But, you know, if you don't manage those things appropriately, you're making those calls for $100,000 or $200,000, then somebody else comes in like we have here, and then they go, what the heck? You know, what's this all? Look at your like as a township. Not necessarily, because it's reflected on the fund balance. But what ends up happening is that you really need to have a capital outlay project. You need to look at best practices. And that's what this board is trying to do now. It's all about best practices. It's all about laying it out, transparency. And so transparency sometimes doesn't come as fast as you'd like it. But with this document, and given the time that we give it on the document, it's going to give everybody the transparency that they were desiring. But to throw something out there and not be complete on that, that wasn't going to be a good practice for us. We need to really develop and understand what's going on with the township and understand the budget.
So just to reiterate on what you said as far as about your constituents, before you or any other board members would go forward, if a project was to come to you tomorrow, you guys would involve all of the 3,300 constituents with sending out a letter, like to make anybody happy.
Well, never make anybody
Well,
happy.
you're never gonna make
Well, we can
everybody
see
happy,
if it's like a major.
transparency, due diligence.
Right, but if it's a major thing where you have a fund, I don't want to be the guy to pull the trigger on $100,000 of taxpayer money. And then ask the board to do that, you know? Say, hey, we got to do this. I don't want that, I want some input.
Right, so what are you saying that you would do for,
That goes for a lot of these major projects. And I guarantee you, from the temperature I feel out there in the public right now, one is we absolutely have to maintain that sewer lift station. That's in the top priority list. If you don't do that, the state can come in if it's mismanaged, can come in and take over that sewer lift station management for us. We don't want that. The other thing is roads. We all drive on them every day. It affects everybody in the township and allows us to expand. That's the third thing I think is internet, which I'm actively working on behind the scenes. I'm trying to get more internet in here, fiber internet. But I believe in that order is that we can attack the county and these other capital outlay projects that we're already kind of involved in and tied to. I believe I need information from the township to move forward with it. I just don't feel comfortable. And I wouldn't want to put the board in a bad situation either, where they just vote on something or ram it through. I mean, we just got done, we're licking our boots here with a full recall and restructuring of the township is expensive. And that's reflected in the budget, one-time expenses. So, I mean, we're moving forward in a good light, in a good way, but we still have to be very cautious moving forward. And we have to do this prudently. Yes.
I just want to add on, the towers that were built, I was a member of the audience at the time. They were discussed probably every board meeting.
may I stand?
And
But what they failed to do, if I may say, I feel that any leader of our board, when they decide to make in a project or one step forward, I feel they have the due diligence to send letters to each and every one of us so that we are aware, so we can make the choice to say, yes, we want to go, or no, we do not. By them failing that, there are so many people in our community that had no clue about motion. There are still people that call me and say they had no idea what other information can you provide us. So I think it is the due diligence of the board when any type
have a few comments that I'd like to make on that. First of all, I find the charge to be interesting that you don't have the current year on there for the $168,000 deficit. Okay? I think it should have been updated to show the current status. Okay? The second thing is that I was on the ground floor with the ARPA fund, and they were heavily restricted. Okay? I do not recall anything saying that we could use that for any type of supplemental expense, like fire or police. Okay? There was 4 or 5 things that you could use it on. It was heavily restricted. One of it was communication and internet, plus the tower. The second one I remember was water and sewer, plus going to sewer line. Okay? I recall that you guys were elected, you used about $30,000 or $40,000 of that money to get computers, cell phones, and some software. I don't believe it's $174,000 left in there. You had used some of that. I questioned it at the time, and I was told that we could use that because it wasn't earmarked for anything. So I don't believe we have that full dollar amount in there. I believe you're transferring the ARPA fund to cover your deficit spending because you're not approving. Okay? Next year, going to be $180,000 short of covering the first credit cost. You're not going to have the ARPA fund money to offset that $180,000. And I think you're trying to cover yourself by using the ARPA money. Yes, I'm involved with the sewer, and I understand that there's going to be costs involved with that. But before you even transfer this ARPA fund money and use it, I strongly suggest that you go back and take a look at the restrictions. I disagree with the two speakers here today that you can just transfer to this fund, general fund, and use it any way you want. Because I remember guidelines. We had some townships that turned the money down because they didn't want to do the guidelines. We had some that only sent some of it and returned it back. So I just caution you to be careful. Also, there was an audit comment that the clerk and the treasurer could be on the monthly. We're going to be going back to that and we keep that the book and be able to go ahead and reconciliate that.
It's already in play. Ryan didn't mention it, but it's already.
Couldn't hear a little bit of what it was saying. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
One quick question.
One more question.
Yeah, I think it's Tom, isn't it? Okay. Tom's bigger question was, is that you were in office at the time of the motion bill being approved, would you be willing and able to stop that project? It's a project that involved the sale of land, private land in an industrial park that was funded with state money. So I guess that's the bigger portion that
I can't answer that. Joy wasn't here.
no, I'm just saying, what he's asking you.
No, Mr. Burkett, no.
Okay, all right, listen, I'm sorry, get out of line here, anyways, please, Casey, thank you. All right, sorry, Joy. All right, yeah. Anybody else with public comment?
Did you give a survey, Jason, when you started hiring attorneys? I never got a survey, I've not gotten a survey of anybody since you was taken over.
No.
Okay, and I thought that's what was one of the comments in New York. But it's one of Tommy's complaints is they never got surveys. Some of us have been here for years at every meeting, and none of these people were here. So, I don't think it's all the board's fault. I think people need to be a little more interested and a little more committed and show up for these things.
You're right.
Okay.
Nobody else moving forward, anybody else in public comment, please? Okay, no other public comment, I'd like to, motion to adjourn.
Hold on, time out.
Oh, you got it.
No, Sarah, stop it. It's only 5 minutes past my bedtime. Okay. So, did we move the ARPA, so did we have to, that's gonna be done later, to approve the move the ARPA funds?
Your phone, rules.
Well, we have to,
Yeah, everything that's on there.
approved, but we just have not, yes.
Yeah, we are not.
Pinpointed where they go.
Not
Okay.
over.
That's all I need